He was a shy and tormented man, suffering beneath the weight of religious guilt and suppressed desires. Robert Aaron Long's descent into darkness would ultimately end in a brutal rampage that shocked the United States of America, destroying not one or two, but several lives. As the nation reeled, his story ignited fierce debates on mental health, discrimination, hatred, and justice. But what were his dark secrets? Was he a lone madman who simply reacted in the most awful of ways? Or was his behavior a symptom of something far more insidious? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the infamous case of the Atlanta spa shootings. Now this one is quite the story, mixed with emotions of shame, secrecy, and addiction. And I'm sure that by the end of it, you will agree with me that this should have never happened. By the way, please subscribe if you want to see more stories like this. And now, with that said, let's dive straight in. Please, grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Robert Aaron Long. Welcome back to America, folks. Today, we're traveling to Atlanta, Georgia. Known for its rich history, diverse culture, and booming economy, the capital of Georgia played a key role in the civil rights movement and is home to many parks and museums. The city boasts a thriving art scene, top universities, and many major companies, including the likes of Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. With a mix of modern skyscrapers and historic neighborhoods, Atlanta offers plenty to do up above and down on the ground. However, when it comes to crime, Atlanta has been a concern for many decades, with violent crime rate way higher than the national average. The good news is that its crime rate has steadily decreased in recent years, leaving hope for many of its residents. But unfortunately, this story does nothing to help that hope.
Some tragic news: the deadly shootings in Atlanta, killing at least 8 people. A suspect is in custody this morning, and police across the country are on alert this morning as well, fearing the attacks may have targeted the Asian community. Steve Osensami is in Atlanta with more as the FBI now gets involved. Good morning, Steve.
That's right, Michael. The FBI is working with local law enforcement here, investigating these shootings. And while it's not clear what led to these killings, it is impossible to ignore that these killings happened at Asian businesses like this one directly behind me in Atlanta, and that most of the victims were Asian women. Georgia authorities are investigating 3 crime scenes across 2 counties and what looks like a series of deadly shootings at Asian massage parlors. I should also point out again that we still have no motive that police are identifying in this case, but police in cities across the country are responding to this, protectively stepping up patrols in the Asian community.
In the evening hours of March the 16th, 2021, news stations across America tuned into Atlanta to expose the horrific shootings that had just taken place. It appeared that up to 8 people had been murdered, and although it would take officers a while to determine the motive or even the perpetrator, it seemed that the Asian community had been targeted. The news was absolutely devastating for the city. Atlanta had already seen its fair share of not only shootings but division in recent years, and this was yet another disappointing blow for them. Within hours, the suspect was identified to be a 22-year-old man named Robert Aaron Long, who, for the most part, seemed to give himself up to officers without any hesitation. In fact, he basically confessed straight away, and with his crime so heavy, he was going to face a myriad of charges. In fact, if you look up his name on Truthfinder, you can see he received one of the heaviest sets of offenses possible, including felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, domestic terrorism, murder, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. And by the way, I actually partner with Truthfinder, and I use it to get details of the people that I cover in my stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you real peace of mind. I learned more about his age, physical appearance, warrant numbers, and relations using Truthfinder. It's one of the most extensive public record search services in the whole of the United States. And with a paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports for almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports by using my link truthfinder.com/chc. Diving into his history, Robert was born on April 6, 1999, to his parents Robert and Diane. He spent most of his life in Woodstock, Georgia, where he was raised in a primarily conservative community. It was in the year 2002 that he and his family moved into a charming one-story Grey Ranch-style house for the tidy sum of $127,000. Of course, that being when house prices were not so astronomical. For the most part, the Longs came across as a good Christian family. It is noted that Robert and his parents would often attend Sunday services, afternoon group activities, and Wednesday evenings at the Southern Baptist Church near home. And it is also worth noting here, especially for this video, that this church views adultery, fornication, homosexuality, polygamy, and more specifically pornography as sinful and offensive to God. Don't worry, we'll come back to this later in the video. Now, Robert did come across as an okay kid, and although he was known to be rather awkward and super shy, he never got in trouble with the law. It is reported that, while at school, he was not only a member of Sequoia's First Priority Club, but other religious groups too. In addition to this, he was also a hunter outside of school and church, meaning that Robert was good with a rifle. But being a law-abiding citizen with no known mental health issues or medication, well, people felt safe around him. So, if he was such a well-rounded person, then what went horribly wrong? Well, everything seemed fine up until the end of high school, but after that, things really seemed to fall apart. After graduating from Sequoia High School in 2017, he seemed to have difficulties in maintaining and respecting his values and beliefs. To begin with, he enrolled at the University of North Georgia campus in Cumming, which was 45 minutes away from home, but unfortunately would leave after the first year without completing any degree or program. He couldn't seem to hack the work and didn't have any other ambitions either, instead opting to pick up odd jobs from neighbors and otherwise sitting around at home. To put yourself in his headspace for a moment, but Robert felt empty. He had no ambition, path, or project to keep him busy. And of course, an idle mind will always create demons. But by the end of 2018, he had thankfully found himself his first adult relationship. Although we don't know her name or much about her, Robert's girlfriend lived about 100 miles away across state lines in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And by all counts, at least from what his friends have said, it seemed like he was smitten. By January of 2019, and against his parents' knowledge, he traveled to her hometown and shacked up with her, eventually telling his mum and dad that he was not ever returning home. And, well, when they heard the news, let's just say they didn't take it too kindly. In response, they called the police to report that their son had run away and was refusing to return home. But since Robert was now an adult, there was nothing that officers could do. It was quite obvious that Robert was just sick of his former lifestyle and clearly wanted a fresh start. Now, this is a rather tricky part of adulthood. Robert knew that he wasn't happy, and of course, he was now old enough to make his own decisions. But still, he also had very little experience of how the world actually works, and he was essentially betraying and abandoning his two biggest team players. Of course, that being his mum and dad. Surprise, surprise, but the relationship between Robert and his new girlfriend would not last very long, and actually, there was one very good reason for that. So, how do I put this subtly? Let's just say that he was addicted to adult videos and the whole service industry behind it. Robert would frequently spend some rather heavy-handed time behind a computer screen, and when he wasn't doing that solo, he was off visiting massage facilities for their, extra services. As you can likely guess, his girlfriend was furious when she found out about these secrets. As a result, she kicked him out of her house, and Robert found himself alone without a partner. But at least he had his magazines, I guess, right? He returned to Woodstock, but not to his family's home. Instead, he would stay in halfway homes or sleep on couches. During this point in his life, you could tell that Robert was not happy about his addiction, and he really took it to heart. And that's because not only was he still deeply religious, but he still really believed in the values of his church. And so it is no surprise that this level of deviance ate away at his conscience. Robert claimed to be tortured by his addiction, that he was living in sin, and he was walking in darkness. And by the way, this isn't me fluffing the story up with dramatic wording. It is precisely what he told his roommate. But still, the raunchy internet usage and the frequent visits to massage parlors continued. Not only was he trapped in his addiction, but he was unable to find a way out on his own. And the more that his frustration grew, the harder it seemed to let go. In an effort to wean himself off of his addiction, Robert eventually set strict limits on his use of the internet. He deleted his Facebook account, avoided anything that might excite him, and would even get rid of his smartphone to swap it out with a flip phone so he couldn't access the internet. Random side note here, but does anyone remember the old Moto Razr? And how cool was that phone back in the day? Friends say that Robert was the kind of guy who would hate himself for pleasuring himself, and would even consider that to be a relapse to his addiction. And as we know, his fixation and frequent visits to the massage spas would even cause the collapse of his relationship. Robert hadn't only lost his partner and his family here, but unfortunately, he would also lose his job through the pandemic. At the time, he had been working for a company that installed trade show exhibits, but of course, was let go when public events stopped happening. So, moving through the year 2020, it is no surprise that his depression skyrocketed after losing everything that kept him grounded. For 2 grueling long years, Robert tried to correct himself, and although he was never able to kick the habit, he at least half repaired his relationship with his parents. Now, in fairness, efforts were made to try to fix the problem. Robert made several visits to rehab and would even go to Hope Quest, which is a religious treatment facility. But it is clear that he was essentially stuck between a rock and a hard place. No pun intended. I say this because, well, he was a young man and clearly had needs. However, his church and his beliefs shunned these urges. This pressure, again no pun intended, would leave him feeling very conflicted within himself, and whenever he gave in to those temptations, he would be left with feelings of guilt and shame. And unfortunately, on March the 15th, 2021, these feelings would begin to boil over. It was on this fateful evening that Robert's parents had once again had enough. With their son spending up to several hours a day watching explicit material, it had become clear to them that he was not doing enough to fight his sinful behavior, and so, with that in mind, they made the decision to kick him out of the house. Retreating to the halfway home that he had been living in, Robert was distraught and emotional. It is said that he went to sleep filled with feelings of shame, anger, and betrayal. Between the early morning hours and noon, he would then go on to watch more adult videos on his mobile phone, and as it turns out, he wasn't all too quiet about it either. When he did eventually leave his room, his housemate asked him if he wanted to talk about it. However, quite visibly deeply embarrassed, Robert said no instead. It appeared that that was the final straw for him, and Robert couldn't hack this internal conflict any longer. It was on that basis that he wanted to leave this world behind, and tragically, he made the decision to do this by taking others with him first. On March the 16th, 2021, and at approximately 2 p.m, Robert legally purchased a 9mm handgun and a box of bullets at a firearms store in Holly Springs. He planned to murder as many massage parlor employees as possible to, quote, save others from the sinful industry. After purchasing the firearm, he then bought a bottle of bourbon at a liquor store, before then driving to Young's Asian Massage found near Ackworth. Surveillance footage shows him arriving at the massage parlor, where he then sat in the car for over an hour and drank to find his courage. He then loaded his gun, got out of the vehicle, and entered Young's Massage. Believe it or not, but he then paid for an adult service, where for the next hour, he was explicitly touched by a masseuse, one that he planned to murder soon after. Once the service was over, Robert then went to the bathroom to get dressed, where he then armed himself with his handgun and put his horrible plan into motion. Walking out of the bathroom, he pulled out his 9mm handgun and fired at multiple employees around the parlor. Paul Andre Michaels, who was at the counter, was fatally shot once in the head. Robert then started walking towards the front of the business in the main hallway, firing at anyone that he met along the way. Dao Yufeng, who was in room 3 at the time, was tragically shot in the head. Xiao Jitan, another worker in room 4, was also shot in the head. And Delana Gonzalez, who was only a customer in room 6, was fatally shot once in the torso. The scene was horrific, with 4 victims mercilessly gunned down and another 2 injured in the process. But before they could even do anything about the situation, Robert calmly fled the area. At 4:50 p.m, he was caught on surveillance camera calmly getting back into his vehicle before then driving away.
Yeah, police in the library right now, so can help me come.
Okay, repeat the address.
1916 Penang Road.
You need police, fire, or an ambulance?
Need a police, We need a library here.
It's a robbery there?
Yeah.
Okay, is this a house, apartment, or business?
Go to spa. They have a gun.
They have a gun, you said?
Yeah.
Where is he at in the building?
I don't know. I'm hiding right now.
Did you have a description of him? Did you see him?
Oh, yeah. Just a white guy.
A white male? What is he wearing?
I don't know. Please come, okay?
Some guy came in and shoot the gun, so everybody heard the gunshot. Some ladies got hurt, I think, and everybody's scared, so they're hiding in the behind. But the ladies passed out.
Okay, let me just let everybody know what's going on. And I understand you're not there.
I'm not there.
Yes, ma'am. But you're giving me some good information. Thank you so much. Bear with me, okay?
And it seemed like he did not waste any time to execute phase 2 of his plan, because only 1 hour later, Robert was then spotted 30 miles away at Gold Massage Spa in Piedmont Road, with this parlor being in Fulton County. His intention remained unchanged. He burst through the doors of Golden Spa and then continued to murder 3 women in cold blood. 2 Gold Massage Spa employees who survived the shooting would later report hearing ticking sounds while in the break room, which turned out to be gunfire. As a result, they hid in a lounge using items to take cover. And although they were mercilessly shot at, they thankfully remained uninjured. Robert then made his way across the street to a third establishment, that being Atlanta Aromatherapy Spa, and while there, another employee was murdered, bringing his grisly death toll up to 8. With 3 massage centers targeted within the hour, it is no surprise that others began to panic. Where the attacker would go next was, at the time, anyone's guess, and so many closed their stores, understandably not wanting to take any risk whatsoever. But then, all of a sudden, Robert Long disappeared. After releasing the surveillance footage, it would not take officers long to identify the suspect as Robert Aaron Long, who, so far, had done a good job at evading the police. And unfortunately, it would be Robert's very own parents who would help capture him, for they had told the officers that they could locate and track him using the location app they'd installed on his phone. And if that wasn't enough, they even installed a tracking device on his car for extra monitoring. Now, they were definitely doing the right thing here, but I can't help but think that Robert probably felt that his own parents screwed him over. Anyway, it turns out that by the time officers found out where he was going, he was more than 150 miles south, traveling towards Florida. And apparently, the main reason for this was simply that no one would expect him there, meaning that he could commit more shootings without being caught. At around 8:30 p.m. and roughly 3.5 hours after the shootings, a Georgia State Patrol trooper monitoring traffic on I-75 South would eventually clock his license plates. In response, he started following Robert's vehicle while waiting for backup. Soon after this, they initiated a traffic stop and then immediately pitted the vehicle, before then ushering Robert out of the car at gunpoint. That is when he was put into the back of a police car where this image was taken, and with his spree finally ending, he was now at the full mercy of the law. Now, to some, the motive was extremely obvious, that being a rampant sex addiction which conflicted with his deep religious beliefs, leaving Robert a very anguished man. But instead of taking accountability for his actions, he instead sought revenge by murdering people in the industry he deemed responsible. Which is absolutely wild, by the way, because how the heck would these people even know he had a problem? Now, as it turns out, he was actually a former customer at 2 of these massage spas. However, the third one was merely conveniently nearby. It is also worth noting here that Robert did actually intend to take his own life, however, only after murdering other people first. Like I said, he planned to travel to Florida, take several other lives, and then claim his own. Yet, thankfully, he would be arrested before he could do any more damage. And with him still alive, many wondered how he would face the consequences of his own actions. Another big question was how the community would react. There was a lot of concern that this attack specifically targeted Asian women, and with this happening shortly after the COVID pandemic, tensions were understandably high. Due to his motive, it was quite clear that Robert had indeed targeted sex workers, but the question of gender and race still remained up for debate. The truth is that he did in fact murder several Asian women, but was this an attack marked by specific discrimination towards them? Or was it simply an attack on an industry where the target often fit their profile? This tragedy was widely covered by media in South Korea, which has close cultural ties with the United States, especially considering that more than 1.8 million Korean Americans call it home. There were several angering side notes to this story. For example, 4 of these victims were above the age of 50 and merely cooked food or opened doors for customers. In addition to this, many were furious that an officer would go on to describe this mass murderer as, quote, just having a bad day. In the days and weeks following the shootings, a number of rallies, runs, panel discussions, and vigils were organized in the greater Atlanta area, including a worldwide vigil which was held on March the 26th that was attended by more than 400 organizations and 2,000 people across the globe, all coming together to remember our victims. The shootings sparked fears of a lack of security among Asian-owned businesses across the United States, a debate over hate crime definitions, and criticism of the current methods used to aggregate hate crime data in the country. Several politicians would also express concern with how easy it was for Robert to obtain a gun on the day of the shooting, which of course would bring up the old debate of gun ownership. Moving into the legal proceedings of this case, Robert would face multiple but separate trials, and that's because the 8 murders were split between Cherokee County and Fulton County. After being arrested, he immediately confessed to the crimes, again stating that his actions were the result of anger towards the sex industry for exploiting his weakness. With the American Psychological Association not classifying sex addiction as a diagnosis in the DSM-5, he had absolutely no chance of using his addiction as an excuse. And so, with that in mind, on July the 27th, 2021, he pleaded guilty to the Cherokee County charges and was therefore sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During their investigation, officers found no evidence of racial bias in the shootings, which undoubtedly would have escalated the severity of his charges. But inversely, his psychologist expressed doubt that he even had an addiction at all, further citing that sex addicts are typically non-violent. However, when it came to the Fulton County charges, things were not so smooth and easy, and that's because the stakes were much higher. With prosecutors claiming that this was a hate crime and therefore the death penalty could apply, Robert was much less likely to plead guilty, and so it's no surprise when he didn't. Not only would his defense team deny this was a hate crime, but they would also claim that the death penalty should be taken off the table due to his age. And with so many motions being placed in the meantime, it is no surprise that this trial has been delayed quite significantly. And although his trial was set to begin in May of last year, it was once again cancelled, with no trial rescheduled. So whether he will actually face a second trial and be given the death penalty, it is not yet clear. However, what we do know from his first trial is that he's already been condemned to life behind bars with no possibility of parole, which is great when you think about it. However, it does not make up for the loss and pain felt by not 1 or 2, but 8 families and beyond. And that is where I'd like to end this video, with the unspoken voices of this tragedy. Delana Ashley Yown was only 33 years old when Robert murdered her. She was only a customer and at the time was with her husband for a normal couple's massage. Her husband, Mario Gonzalez, was in another room during the attack. To make matters even worse, officers would detain and then put him in handcuffs for 4 hours after she was murdered, believing that he may have actually been the shooter. The couple had been married for less than a year and had 2 children together, a teenage son and an 8-month-old baby girl. Delana was known to be a friendly person who was said to have a hidden light around her, one that drew you in. In light of her death, she leaves behind a family who deeply miss her every single day. 49-year-old Xiao Chi Tan was the owner of Young's Asian Spa. Born in Nanning on the China-Vietnam border, she then moved to the US after the turn of the new millennium. Xiao Chi was full of smiles and laughter and was an absolute pleasure to be around. Little can be found about Dao Yufeng, who was 44 years old at the time that she was murdered. During an interview, a friend described her as kind and quiet. and I'm sorry that I couldn't find any more out about her. Paul Andrew Michaels was 54 years old when he was murdered. He was simply at the spa doing some maintenance work for them when he was gunned down. He was yet another casualty with no affiliation to the industry that Robert had targeted. Hyun-jung Grant was a single mother who worked hard for her 2 sons. Formerly a schoolteacher in South Korea, she made the move to the US to make more money for her family, and now they are left without her. Soon Chung Park, who was 74 years old, simply made food for the employees at Golden Spa. She was a very healthy and down-to-earth woman, and her family believed that she would easily make it past 100. Sun Cha Kim moved to the US in the 1980s. It is said that she was an absolute powerhouse of a person, and would simultaneously work 3 jobs in order to support her family. All she wanted in life was to grow old with her husband and her grandkids. But sadly, she passed away at 69. And finally, Yong I-yu, who was still looking very young at the age of 63, was a great mother who was always there for her kids. She loved karaoke, cooking, and spending time with her family. And again, she too leaves a massive void in her absence.
For them, moving on feels impossible even though it's been a year. The shootings claiming the lives of mothers, sisters, wives, and an Army veteran. The pain for their families still raw as some try to honor the victims' lives by pushing for gun reform.
I'm going to devote a significant portion of my life, not only being a better dad, but as long as people want to listen to what I have to say, I hope I can help.
The most frustrating thing about this case is that it essentially came into fruition out of absolutely nothing. I'm not going to say what is right or wrong when it comes to adult content, but what I will say is that suppression locked behind a wall of guilt and shame was highly unhealthy for Robert's mental health. But what I will never understand is how feelings of guilt and shame can then just suddenly jump to cold-blooded murder. Now that is categorically insane. I do certainly think that there was more going on here. I mean, a normal person, especially one so devout to Christianity, would not proceed to murder. So, on that note, what do you think was going on here? Do you think this was just terrible mental health, or do you have your own theory here? As always, please share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this case up here today, but before I go, I'd like to thank Truthfinder again for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports, then please go to truthfinder.com/chc. Also, you can support the channel by going to my Patreon here, or alternatively, just follow me on social media, most notably my Instagram here. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the end of the video today, folks. Thank you so much for watching and making it this far. As always, I really do appreciate you sticking around. Anyway, I'll be back in probably 3 or 4 days. Until that moment arrives though, please do remember to look after yourselves, look after each other, and as always, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.